what is happening at Newville Books?
I'm giving a reading at 7.
At 7 o'clock?
7, yeah.
Okay. Now, in your book, The Pretty Girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a novella within a collection of short stories, right?
Right. Yeah.
There are many references to Jewish culture, literature, etc. Can you tell me a bit about your background? So,
My religious background?
Well, just your general background, how it informs your work.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Boston in Westwood, but my whole extended family is from New York.
Okay.
So New York Jews, and everyone's always asked me, like you asked me earlier today, if I'm a New York Jew, even though I'm not a New York Jew. So, although I had a pretty secular upbringing, I was a Reformed Jew when I was about
my grandfather used to say that was a branch of Nazism.
I had this friend who said, what does he say? We were so secular. We were Baptist, that's my sort of cultural upbringing. And even though I am quite secular myself, we were always very culturally Jewish. So we celebrated all the holidays, and we were very committed in that way. So that's my background.
Okay. But obviously it's influenced your work. I mean, there are a lot of references to it, so you have a Jewish sensibility, definitely.
Yeah.
Your character in the novella, Pretty Girl, Andrea, she makes a sort of a years-long study of her enigmatic elderly aunt Rose, right? I know by interviewing people, I learn a lot about myself. I mean, do you think this is one of the motivations for Rose to sort of study her aunt, to find more about herself through her aunt?
I mean, that's a good question, but that's what I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't thinking that. No,
okay.
Just that she's really interested in her aunt, and her aunt is someone she loves and who's also a puzzle to her because she can't figure out what her life had been like, and she's curious about what her life had been like, so that she's interested in her, but I don't think we're studying her exactly, but that's not how I conceived of it.
But she had a sort of passion about finding out about her. About
her aunt, yeah. And it gets traced through a mystery that she finds out through her painting.
Right. Yeah. Well, why do you think she's passionate about this? I mean,
that's a good question. Well, I just think because she loved her aunt. I mean, I think that, and also that maybe so she sees things in her aunt that perhaps she didn't have in her own. Like, Andrea's not a particularly pretty woman, and
she had problems with her weight.
Right, her weight and just her sense of her physical self. And although I don't think explicit mention is made of it, or maybe it is, but her aunt is a pretty woman in some ways. I think she was. Yeah. She's interested in that about her, sort of what it's like to live in the world as an attractive woman, especially if you're not yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In Rose's apartment in New York City, on the Chelsea section of New York City, there's a picture of a young girl entitled The Pretty Girl, that we later find out is Rose herself. The painting must remind Rose of a traumatic point in her life, and in some way acts and creates a mystery about her. It must remind Rose of a traumatic point of life, but yet it creates a mystery for the outside world. I mean, first off, why would you think that? Why do you think that Rose would have this picture that constantly reminds her? And I mean, were you thinking about this when you were writing about the picture?
Yeah. I think she wants it because it's a reminder of this earlier part of her life and the self, and when she was being painted, she was the object of great devotion and love, even though that got perverted because of things that happened afterwards. But I think, sort of seeing yourself as this tremendous love object is, sort of flattering to her ego, and that's part of it, even though she's not a person who seems certainly to her niece as egoistical at all. But I think, she has that ego that everyone has, so it's flattering to her.
But also painful, right?
Right, painful too.
Because Auerbach, I won't give away the whole story. But, and how about in some way were you thinking about how this painting would be sort of this catalyst for the protagonist, Andrea, to look into her aunt?
You mean when I started the story?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember at what point I figured out that there was going to be this whole backstory, because, as you know, the story takes place and then you go back many years. And I'm not sure at what point I knew that there was going to be that whole backstory, and when I knew the painting was going to serve such a big function. I can't remember what my writing process was there.
Okay, all right. Well, why do you can't remember why you chose a prop such as a painting? Do you think that is a good literary device? Let's say.
Yeah.
I remember I was asking your friend Jessica Treadway about the vision of a ghost. Is that a good literary device? And she said anything is a good literary device if you employ it well.
Right,
so,
right. Well, I think a painting, if it's a self-portrait, obviously, it's a picture of you at a certain time in life.
Yeah.
And there's always a story behind how a painting got painted.
Okay. Dorian Gray. Exactly. So often young people, when they see an elderly person, they forget that what they were once vibrant, creative, and sexual beings. Do you view Rose as being more aware or curious than the average person of her age?
Her age. Well, it's funny. I already talked to you that this is some way a complete fictional version of my great aunt Ethel, and I always thought she was much more interesting than people her age. Much more vibrant, much more fun, much more lively. So yes, I do see this character as all that, much more engaged and engaging, or certainly from the point of view of the character who narrates the story, Andrea, she's much more fun as when Andrea's a little girl looking at her, and when Andrea's at college, she's also more engaging than the other adults in her life who are kind of staid and have settled into sort of traditional gender roles and traditional professional roles.
Okay. I mean, how much does your overall body of work take from your personal history? And do you agree with the old adage to write what you know?
I have this, there's this writer, Lori Moore, do you know?
Lori Moore,
yeah. She has this anecdote, she says...
Didn't you write the story you say you want to be a writer or something like that?
How to be a writer.
How to be a writer.
Right, yeah.
Very funny.
So someone, I guess, she said this to me, I don't know if she says this publicly, but she said the relationship between a writer's autobiography and the work is a little like the relationship between the items in a kitchen cupboard and a cake. Like, the cake is made out of all the items in the kitchen cupboard, so everything I write is made out of my life completely. But I don't think it's recognizable in the way, like when you eat cake, you don't say, "Oh, I've got some baking powder here." So
you don't get into it,
right. So that's what I feel like with my book. Like, it's all me. It's all parts of me are all autobiographical in a certain way, but none of it's directly, none of it's cake. It's all baking powder and salt and flour. And so, if that makes sense. So the right way, I don't like that piece of advice, actually, because I feel like you should write whatever you want, and if you don't know something, you should use the fact that you're writing as an excuse to learn about it. I mean, you should know about it by the time you write it, but if you don't know it when you first sit down, then it's just your job to learn about it.
Okay.
So,
how about your teaching? I mean, do you teach undergraduates?
Undergraduates and graduates.
Okay, and so, I know I teach Introduction to Creative Writing, things like that. I mean, I'd be interested to know how an old pro like you goes about, introducing, students in the seminal stages of writing. What do you emphasize? How do you approach it?
Well, I always start the semester off by telling students that within every writer there are two writers. One is the writer who wants to write, and the other is the writer who's preventing that writer from writing. So there's the supplier, the person who has good ideas and interesting thoughts and wants to take the class. And then there's the censor, who is the person who edits, and who's the policeman who says, don't take this class, you'll make a fool of yourself. And the terms supplier and censor from my own writing teacher, who was John Hersey, back a billion years ago.
John Hersey?
Yeah.
Of the Japan? Of
yes, of Hiroshima. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, on the wall. And so those were his terms, the supplier and the censor. And I feel like my job as a writer is well, I can't teach anyone the supplier. I can't teach anyone to have the imaginative side of things. I can teach anyone the censor. Anyone can learn grammar rules or how to edit or basic things about character plot, that kind of thing. But if I'm a good teacher, hopefully I can help people access their imagination, so I can help get their supplier going, and I can also help them figuring out when it's time to bring in the censor and shape their work. So my idea as a teacher is to get these two writers in balance for the students, and to do that by helping them access their imagination. Initially, we spend the whole first part of the class just doing exercises, coming up with ideas. I try to just be supportive of them, don't say anything critical, and then slowly bring in a more critical voice as the semester goes on, and that's when we start to talk, more about technical craft kind of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I often find teaching, running poetry workshops sometimes becomes more like group therapy. And like I remember once telling a student, she said, my mother wants me to take the course because she thinks I write Hallmark cards very well. I'd be a writer for Hallmark. And I said, that's exactly what we don't want. Right,
yeah.
right. And she never saw her again. I mean, this was an adult education type thing. So do you find that? I mean, it's like, if you're writing right, you're making yourself vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Yeah. No, I think if the students are really writing well, you get to know them really well, because you get to know what really troubles them and drives them. And even if their stuff is, like this cake thing, even if you can't see a direct connection to their autobiography, you certainly see a direct connection to what most interests them or pains them or whatever. So I feel like you do get to know them really well.
Well, you're an established writer now. You have a fairly secure academic position. You've got a number of books, awards, the whole deal, big deal publications, big deal magazines and journals. Tell us, for the younger writer out there, what is you're starting out, and you told me you're in Cambridge and all that. Mm-hmm. What is the writer's life like? I mean, give me, it's not, people think it's, it's just, you're brooding along the beach and you'll just drink all the time, and
well, I drink all the time.
It's a romantic,
I wonder what the young writer's life is like. I don't know what the young writer's life is like.
Well, when you were young, right?
I know what my life was like when I was young. Well, we were talking about this before, that when I went to college, I went to graduate school, and I got very lucky young. A lot of good things came my way, so I had some fellowships.
Well, you must have had some talent.
Well, but I did get lucky, and I had more early luck than most have. But when I came back to Cambridge in my 20s, I was adjuncting and doing a lot of freelance editing and piecing together a lot of different things. But I had a big friendship group. There were a lot of writers around, and we would go to whatever reading was on in town. There was always stuff to go to, and it was actually quite a lot of fun. And now my life is really quite different. Obviously, I'm middle-aged. I have a child, and I found it really hard to get my writing in. I found it hard then to get my writing in because I was working so many part-time jobs, and now I find it really hard to get my writing in again because of my work. So and being a mother, so I feel like writing is just people complain about balancing work and parenthood, and I feel it's like work, parenthood, and art, and it's just really hard for me to figure out the balance and give enough time to the writing. Actually, it's really hard. Do you feel
you're doing enough writing?
Right now, I'm not doing any. People say you should write every day and exercise every day, and I do not write or exercise every day. I just do both when I can, and often I can't, just because I have too much for money work, as I call it. So
what? So it's just getting your feet wet with all these different. And when you're starting out, with all these different. Some people are journalists,
right?
You were, you were teaching,
But I did a lot of book reviewing early on. I did a lot of stuff early on, which I still tell my students to do, although the world is different because of the web. Yeah. But that they should try to do things to get published, even if it's not like getting their fiction published. Like I wrote tons of book reviews early on. It was just good to have my name out there, to have a publication that made me feel legitimate.
Everything, so.
Right. And now there are, I think, online opportunities, and I don't even know what they are, but to have your name out there in some way.
If your child asks you, I told you that I'm going to be a writer, Mom. Just like you. What would you say?
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't be entirely happy, which is a terrible thing to say. Or I would be worried. I'd be really worried because I think it's so hard to make a life as a writer. And I feel like there's so much disappointment involved, and it's just a real
Right, if you're an
struggle.
accountant, you know, you...
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, if my child really wanted to be a writer, I would encourage them, but there would be part of me that would think, oh no.
Yeah.
Which is terrible to say. I guess I'd feel that if he was going to be a painter too, like my husband, that seems like a really hard life.
But then
and it's
again,
harder now. But
you love writing, and,
Right,
and you're,
right, and
you're
I'm glad
able
I
to
do
make
it.
some sort of living
Yes,
doing
yeah.
it, you know, it's so...
It just seems like it's even harder now than it was from, I mean, I found it very hard, but obviously I was able to do it, and I am a writer now. But it seems like even a bigger challenge now than it was 20 years ago to be able to become an artist and have a life as an artist, just because of all the things you hear people talking about in the book business. So that's sort of a bad reaction.
Yeah.
But maybe he will want to be. He's very creative, my son. Yeah.
Well, there's a way. You know, there's a way to work it out. You know, I remember my brother Donnie Mullen said, you know, you want to be a Jewish man, be a doctor, be a lawyer. He became a paper engineer, but he was always interested in theater. And so he worked and he couldn't stand it, so he became a technical guy, lighting guy in some Molenberg College, got into Yale drama, and then now an award-winning, Tony Award-winning lighting design, Lion King,
Oh, is he
Spider-Man,
really?
and all that. But it was his passion, you know.
Right,
So usually, some way it works out, even though
Yeah.
at the time, you know, what the hell
Yeah,
are you doing?
and the true answer is I would want my son to do whatever he wanted to do. So
Yeah.
if he wanted to be a writer, then I would be thrilled that he found something he wanted to do. I mean, I feel like that's a challenge. I think of my current students, like it's a challenge for them to figure out what they really love. And
Yeah.
So whatever he really loved, I would be excited for him to do.
That's the good thing. You have about 20 minutes or 22 minutes to read. No, not that many. 10 minutes.
10 minutes to read, okay.
I got you nervous. 10 or 11 minutes to
Okay.
read from your work, whatever you want.
Okay.
Lay it on us.
Okay, well, I'll read the beginning of my story, a wedding
Whatever you
story.
want.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
And will
And
you
this
stop
book
me,
is
or-
this book is available at you can't see it that well, but it's available at Amazon.com and all the other places and
Right.
at the bookstores.
Yeah.
And you're going to be reading at Newtonville Books tomorrow at 7 in Newtonville, Mass. So please go.
It's actually now in Newton. It's moved to Langley Street. It's moved. It's not in the old location.
Oh, right,
So it's 10 Langley Street.
Yeah,
It's
just
not where
look
it
it
used
up
to
on
be. Okay.
Yep.
Tell me when to start.
Go.
Okay. This is a wedding story. Her trip to London was purely for pleasure, but Rachel Rubenstein did have a goal. She wanted to buy presents for her nephews, something fun that wouldn't cost too much. She found what she was looking for at the grocer's, chocolate eggs with prizes inside. They were from Germany, or maybe it was Switzerland. Anyway, they were hollow chocolate eggs lined with white, as if the shell were on the inside. Rachel cracked open a few while she was still in London to make sure they'd please. She found tiny puzzles, small one-toothed monsters, itty-bitty tops. Perfect. Only her eggs melted by the time she got home. So that she gave the kids little misshapen brown lumps of, you know what I'm thinking those look like, her sister Greta began. I'd like that to be one of those thoughts you leave unexpressed. Gotcha, Greta said. So months later, Rachel wasn't surprised, not entirely, by the foil-wrapped chocolate egg in Mamie Bess's effects. She associated such items with Europe. Ditto Mamie, her grandmother, who'd come from Poland to New York City in the 1930s and stayed there until earlier this morning, when burial forced her removal to a Long Island cemetery. Not that Mamie was actually on Long Island. She'd joined the everlasting, if Rabbi Cohen, he of the spittly lips and saggy cheeks, could be trusted. Rachel wasn't sure she believed in such things, but it was enough that Mamie did. The last time they'd spoken, it was about a date Rachel had gone on. So, Mamie had said, you mind me asking what he's like? I don't know, Rachel said. She was in her late 20s and vague when it came to her personal life. It seemed altogether possible that she might never have one. A doctor and Jewish, so it should be good, but I just couldn't get much of a conversation going with him. The man had been the grandson of one of Mamie's friends. Rachel was in a period of welcoming blind dates, no matter what quarter they came from. He doesn't need to be perfect. Perfect isn't for here. That's for the Jeneveld. You know what that means? It's Jewish. It means the other side. Rachel smiled. She hadn't known that Mamie had notions about the hereafter. She never mentioned it before. There was definitely a life is for the living philosophy that ran through the family. Rachel didn't really like talking about her non-existent romantic life with her grandmother, but she added, he doesn't need to be perfect, but I should be able to talk to him, don't you think? Mamie mused. Talking's overrated. The chocolate egg made Rachel think of a jar that Mamie had kept in the pantry of her old house in Queens. Mamie lived there before moving to the condo in which Rachel was now boxing up her belongings. The jar had been full of candies that didn't exist anywhere save in Mamie's closets. Say M&M in the old Queens house, and you might be speaking a foreign tongue. But on Mamie's shelves, there were always containers stuffed full of hard candies that dissolved into soft, cakey centers, and strange mints that turned into chocolates the longer you sucked. Rachel didn't have any memory of chocolate eggs, but here was one now. She peeled it immediately. She was immoderately greedy for sweets, though dutifully embarrassed by this fact. The chocolate was old, dusty white, the way chocolate gets after many years. Rachel sniffed. It smelled only vaguely of cocoa. It might have been a chocolate egg from the old country, but it clearly wasn't solid. It felt in her fingers like those Kinder eggs she'd found in London. There might even be a Cracker Jack-type prize inside. Age, when it came to candy, didn't worry her. She nibbled the top of the egg and imagined she heard someone cry, "Gewalt!" The egg didn't surprise Rachel, but the little rabbi inside the egg certainly did. "Shalom," he called, half in warning, so she wouldn't bite further. "Oh my," Rachel cried, and put the egg down, a little repulsed, as if it were a tiny mouse rather than a holy man crawling over offensive chocolate to greet her. "Simon," he called, "master of the name." "What?" she said. "What?" She felt momentarily dizzy and put her hand to her head. Had she had enough water today? Once, when she was in college, she'd gotten so dehydrated she'd started hallucinating. "My name," he said. "I was just translating for you. Simon Balsham." "Uh-huh," Rachel said, as if in assent. Could a figment of your imagination make up a name that would never occur to you? Probably not. Rachel wasn't all that religious herself, but she'd had a bat mitzvah way back when, and a few things had trickled down to her from visits with Mamie and her occasional foray into the synagogue in Maine where she lived. "The Baal Shem," she said now. "Wasn't he the founder of Hasidism?" she was about to say, but the rabbi interrupted her. "He was the Baal Shem Tov, the Holy One. I'm not him." In the Middle Ages, Baal Shem was a name given to any Jewish rabbi who might be a miracle worker. "And you're one of them." "I'm one of them," he said. "But it's not the Middle Ages." "Well," Simon said, brushing a shard of chocolate from his shoulders, "if you want to get stuck on details." He had a dark mustache and dark hair, both almost as black as the bit of fabric he wore as a skull cap. But his beard was flecked with white. His head of woolly hair discomforted her, resembling, as it did, the hair of one of the divorced parents at the daycare center where she worked. Rachel was always half hoping the man would ask her out. "How long have you been in there?" "What's time to someone inside an egg?" "Oh," Rachel said earnestly, "I guess I don't know." He looked at her expectantly. The flat, mournful planes of his cheeks made her think of a Modigliani painting. Below them, his long beard hung like two separate pendants from his chin. Rachel didn't know what to say. "What sort of miracles do you do?" "I don't like to brag." "No," she said, "I suppose you wouldn't." Rachel's mind was blank. She tried to call up an appropriate question, but everything she might ask, everything about which she was genuinely curious, struck her for some reason as off limits, or too silly. Who, for instance, had sewn the little dark suit he was wearing? Out of what ancient workshop came his mildly scuffed miniature shoes? She didn't ask, and yet she wasn't at ease with the quiet, though the rabbi sat peaceably looking at her as if talk or no talk, it was all the same to him. At length, Rachel decided to treat him like any guest. "Can I get you maybe something to eat?" "That would be welcome." "I don't know what's here." She opened Mamie's refrigerator, felt a stab of pain at the prune juice and cottage cheese there. The freezer had an iced-up bag of frozen ravioli. She turned for the cabinets, and the rabbi contented himself with the better part of a garbanzo bean as a snack. Should I stop there?
No, we still got time.
That's time? Or?
No, we still have time.
Oh, keep reading? Okay.
Great. And just interrupt. I always tell my students descriptions, detail, and your very studied descriptions of the characters. And
Oh, thanks.
well, I mean, you must know that.
Yes, I hope so. So we'll just, I don't know, tap the table when I'm getting close to that.
Okay.
Okay. So Rachel said as he chewed his garbanzo bean, is there a reason why you're here? Perhaps, the rabbi said, but didn't elaborate. Rachel knew which way was up. A miracle worker was no genie in the bottle, and even if he were, a rabbi required righteous behavior, selflessness at the least. So she did have the urge to rub his head and ask if he could help her meet a nice guy, or lose a few pounds, or reverse the state of the mutual fund into which she'd poured her meager retirement savings. A rush of shame came over her as the rabbi sat down, leaning his back against the pot of jade plant and cooling himself in the shade of its leaves. "Lovely," the rabbi said, tugging the dark gabardine of his suit over his hips and crossing his feet at the ankles. It looked like he intended to stay a while. In the morning, the men from the auction house would be coming to sell all this. Rachel gestured to what remained unpacked. A table full of cranberry glass in which dust had settled permanently, a coffee table cluttered with porcelain figurines and a giant painting of 3 mermaids. Attached to various pieces of furniture and a large oval mirror in the hallway were name tags: Shira, Jenny, Greta, Samuel, Tova. Most of the bigger items were going to a grandchild or a great-grandchild. Rachel was supposed to take the grandfather clock, though there really wasn't enough room for it in her apartment. For the time being, it would be stored in Greta's basement. If you don't mind, I have to. Please, the rabbi said, gesturing, as if to say she should continue doing what she'd been doing. For the moment, I'd just like to watch. The evening continued almost as if Rachel were alone. The rabbi stood only once to resettle himself into an old bag of white beans on the kitchen table, as if it were some giant throw pillow from the 70s. As he moved, he muttered in Yiddish, and when Rachel turned at the sound of his words, he looked up, his gaze was disarmingly direct, to say, "You speak Jewish?" No, Rachel admitted. "Oh," the rabbi said, and didn't translate his words. For the rabbi, Rachel found a 250-count box of wooden matches, the contents of which she tossed into a trash bag, already full with overstretched sweaters, worn slippers, and a disarming box of Depends undergarments. Probably no one knew what Mamie had suffered in the end. For the rabbi's mattress, Rachel dug a purse-sized container of tissues from her handbag and added an old embroidered handkerchief of Mamie's late husband for a blanket. Rachel spent the night in Mamie's old bed, felt the discomfort of this acutely, though Mamie had lived a good long life, and death at age 92 was no tragedy. Who if Rachel didn't know this? A young woman who flinched at the evening news and fretted over tragedies near and far, an abduction in Florida, the cancer in her boss's breast, the bomb in Jerusalem, oh good Lord. Still, she'd missed the old woman. Mamie had been a true friend.
Thank you. Thank you. You still have a few minutes?
I still have a few minutes.
What's your website, by the way?
What is the address? www.debraspark.com.
Okay, Debra spelled D-E-B.
B-R-A.
Spark.com.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any short piece? Because we have like...
do a short piece? Okay, I'll read one more paragraph. Okay, this is...
we let you keep going until for the sake of the tape. If
okay. So the rabbi decides to tell stories to Rachel. He tells a series of stories which are going to come to be important for her. So he tells her one story, and it jumps ahead to when she's at work, and I'll read that last paragraph. Rachel wasn't one to keep secrets, but the following week, back at the Busy Bees Child Care Center, where she had served as art instructor to the pre-K set for almost 6 years, she didn't feel quite ready to announce that she had a pocket-sized rabbi living with her. The people at the center weren't Jewish. Few people in Maine were. If they found her dreidel craft projects exotic, what would they make of this? Rachel didn't know herself what she thought of the circumstances, and after her first inquiry about the rabbi's purpose, she asked no further questions, supposing